Well, hey there. How you doing today? Welcome back to my Mysteries of the Multiverse podcast, where we look at a lot of interesting and anomalous topics and some of the scientific basis for these topics. And, showing that there's a lot of phenomena that, nobody told us about when we were younger, that we're learning that are real. And one of those phenomena is definitely, for me at least, Bigfoot, cryptids, anomalous creatures, and so forth. And I'm particularly interested in talking to witnesses and the experiences that they've had around these creatures, and especially how difficult it is to talk about it if you've had one of these experiences, since most people are afraid. They're not only possibly afraid from the experience they had, they're afraid of what their colleagues and friends and family members are going to think about them if they talk about their experiences. You know what I'm saying here. So they kind of get a double whammy. And so I think these encounters are underreported, which, in statistics, we say there's some sort of bias there against knowing the full amount of information. Because people just don't tend to talk about these things very easily, or the other possibility is that they've forgotten about it. And that can even happen in a very short amount of time. People can forget about their encounters. If you look at the literature, you'll find people can forget about their encounters even a few minutes later, because it's just so shocking and so different to encounter these other life forms. And so I want to share a story that is very personal to me that happened to a friend of mine while I was writing Dark Matter Monsters, my book about the intersection between Bigfoot and cryptids and condensed matter physics and ball lightning, coherent matter, and so forth. And so here's the story. I think you're going to, enjoy this. I mean, it's fascinating and honestly quite shocking at the same time. I had this friend who I knew back from the 90s learning remote viewing at the Farsight Institute in Atlanta. And I'm just going to call her Mary for the purposes of this broadcast. And we had known each other back then while learning remote viewing, had gotten together a few times. She lived in Arizona. And we hadn't seen each other for a while. We thought it'd be fun to get together and just go over, what we had learned about remote viewing and compare notes and just catch up and share information for a few days. So she came up to Boulder in... it would have been in 2021. And we're still working on Dark Matter Monsters. And we met a few times for coffee at a local food hall that had a nice view of the Front Range. And I was telling her about the book and working on it and so forth. And what she didn't tell me at the time was that she thought all people that believed in Bigfoot were cuckoo nutcases, who were just had these fantasy ideas about these creatures, which she did not believe in. But she didn't tell me that at the time in December of 2021. She just kind of went along with my description of the book and kind of played along. But later she told me she was sort of laughing at me internally, but wasn't showing it, very clever. So after spending, a couple days hanging out and talking, she went back to Arizona, and she went back to her family's house. They had a place in a vacation cottage in northeastern Arizona on the Mogollon Rim area, to the east of Flagstaff. So I hadn't heard from her for a while. Finally, when I did hear from her, she told me the following story. She had driven back to this vacation cottage, and she started noticing some of the things that I had talked about with respect to Sasquatch behavior, including strange sounds coming from the forest. I mean, this was in a small town that was surrounded by forest. Strange sounds, tree structures, strange wooden constructions in the woods, and strange animal smells, and footprints, and those sorts of characteristics that you'll have if Sasquatch, Bigfoot are around. She noticed that some of the local park had been dismantled overnight, but it really didn't look like it was something a human could do. It looked like it would have taken a lot of strength to pull the benches out and so forth with those concrete balls and so forth that anchor them in the ground. And she started noticing the tree structures, which looked like teepees made out of sticks, a lot of sticks. And she always thought she had seen those sort of teepee-like structures around her cottage. She always thought they had been constructed by Boy Scouts, though she never saw any Boy Scouts. She couldn't think what else would make tree structures like that. And there were big trees that were put perpendicular to other trees and so forth, and very sort of strange sort of arrangements of logs and things. But she kind of rationalized it away. She saw some big footprints, wasn't sure what those were about. And she said her parents always told her that the strange howls at night were just, the animals in the forest. And then she noticed that there was... so this is what happened. She went to the tree structures and started playing with them, like taking them apart and stuff. And that seemed to set off kind of a chain of events where she started finding odd-looking branches resting up against the back of the family's dwelling there in this little town in northeastern Arizona. So she saw this one day, this kind of strange branch resting up right against the back, like someone had to have put it there. And she began thinking, well, maybe Simeon was right about these Bigfoot. Maybe they exist around here. And she went back to Phoenix and then thought maybe, she should stay away from there. But then her, rational mind took over and said, oh, that's ridiculous. I'm an adult and these things don't exist. Something like that. I'm kind of oversimplifying it a bit, but you kind of get the idea. So she went back, I think she said a couple weeks later, and she saw some of the same sort of tree structures again, heard some of the howls and things like this. And she was in the middle of a meditation. She was meditating, and she said to me that, and by the way, she's given me permission to talk about this story. She said that the meditation, all of a sudden, her eyes are closed, and she's looking out towards this picture window in the living room, that the meditation became too strong. Like there was something else impinging on the meditation. It was better than it should have been. And it just felt very strange. And she opened her eyes and she saw a huge Bigfoot looking at her through the picture window. It was squatting down, and when it was squatting, it was 5 or 6 feet high. Okay, in the squatting position. And it was looking at her, and when they made eye contact, she said it was just the most peculiar sensation of sort of terror and curiosity at the same time. The Sasquatch stood up, and she said it was just huge. When she looked at the branches, that it was, head was near it, was like over 12 feet tall, dark black hair, just massive. And it went behind a tree and then went behind another tree. And she sort of had a panic attack at this point. I mean, it was kind of like everything that we'd been talking about, the book, Dark Matter Monsters, All of a sudden, she went from being a non-believer to like, they're right there outside on the other side, maybe 100 feet away, which isn't far for something that big. And, she told me she had a panic attack and just went for the car and drove out of there. Did not lock the doors, did not turn off the lights, and did not even take her laptop. Now, how often have you been so frightened that you left your laptop behind? And I believe she didn't go back there again, and the family ended up selling this place because of the Sasquatch encounter. And she was afraid to go out. Mary was afraid to go out for, I think, like a year afterwards to go into the woods. And so if you look at these encounters, this is very typical. It's people are seeing something that they've been taught to believe isn't real. And all of the symptoms and characteristics and behaviors that are around Sasquatch, you've been rationalizing them away in your mind as just something ordinary, like Boy Scouts making the tree structures and so forth. And I just think it's very interesting that people they're going from denial, not believing in it, to, oh my gosh, it's right in front of me, run. It's quite a shift in your brain's behavior, which has very strong defense mechanisms. And there's a lot of denial involved. She did believe that there was some activity even back in Phoenix, finding some things around the house there. So her main concern was like not ticking them off. She already had kind of run away from them. They weren't displaying any aggressive behavior towards her while she was in, the vacation home. But she sort of didn't want to tick them off. And people feel that way sometimes, like they can follow you back home, like the hitchhiker effect or something. I don't know if that's true in this case, but she felt it could be true. So it's just so amazing how some of these topics create this very hostile reaction from people, or a denial, or a kind of a humorous, condescending attitude towards people like us that believe in these things, or have read, looked at the evidence and come to a conclusion that they're real. And it's not belief, it's just based on the evidence. And so here's someone I knew very well who went from being a skeptic, pretty strong skeptic, to being afraid to go outside and walk around because she wasn't sure what would happen next. She said that those few seconds while they were staring at each other is just the most intense experience. It's almost as if, and you've heard this before, that they can project themselves into your mind. She said it was like being a mouse in a maze where someone else had designed the maze and the mouse was going to lose every time. That's, she said, how it felt to be looking at this Sasquatch close by and have it looking back at her. It was like it was a game and you weren't going to win the game. That was just the feeling. And that's quite a shock, I think you have to admit, for humans who we've been raised to believe we're the top of the food chain, right? We're the apex predator. But let's say there's another apex predator that's more apex than we are. All of a sudden, this whole construct you've had about who you are and who humans are, it just gets shattered in seconds. And it leads to a type of PTSD. And this is, I believe, what she experienced and many other witnesses have experienced, which is why so many of them don't want to go outside anymore, out into the woods. They just want to stay around people and so forth. because it's a blow to our ego structure to be around something that's possibly equally or more intelligent than we are in some ways. Nothing has prepared us for this. And I think this applies to in the entire range of what I call dark matter life forms, is other types of life that have been around the whole time that are more based in dark matter than in light matter that we're used to. And they just have different characteristics, and you might be encountering these types of life forms and creatures, but you're denying it, your brain is forgetting about it, and so forth. You get the idea. So, I mean, this also applies to any future extraterrestrial contact or interdimensional contact. You know, we've had a lot of hearings, relatively a lot of hearings in Congress this year, 2024, relative to the past. I mean, at least we're talking about it. And, you know, this could just be the beginning. Think of the, I guess you call it, ontological shock of realizing that there's other types of life around and that you're not the king of the hill anymore. You know, our whole kind of sense of place in the universe could get rearranged from being, you know, the top dog on planet Earth to all of a sudden maybe we're not the top dog at all. I mean, and that's what you would expect from some of these life forms. I mean, Bigfoot being very skilled predators in some ways. I mean, they're not going to show themselves if they don't have to. They just kind of show up for certain people. And that's another aspect to it. You know, when you see them, you wonder, you know, why me? Why am I seeing them? And so forth. It just creates a lot of confusion, and it's reinforced by the fact that we don't talk about it. We're kind of, you know, in Edwin Abbott's Flatland, where, I mean, until recently, where you just don't talk about these things out of fear of ostracism and ridicule and, you know, fear of being made fun of and so forth by your fellow humans, which, you know, nobody likes. I don't think any mammals like that sort of thing. We're concerned about, you know, our place in the pack. And so we don't talk about these sort of topics. I mean, I think it's starting to change now. There's a lot of podcasts about these subjects, a lot of places to get information. And I think people are increasingly talking about this, and it's considered okay. You know, again, congressional hearings about UFOs with Air Force pilots and so forth, naval pilots, saying what they've seen. But, I mean, still you have quite a bit of stigma around these topics. So, I guess the point of what I'm saying is, it's not just about getting facts about these topics and thinking that'll change people's minds or that the facts are enough. I mean, that's what we've been taught about science and the scientific method, but it's more than that. It's a willingness from society to engage with these topics and be curious enough to want to get the truth about what's going on, to make people feel okay about sharing their stories. You know, in sociology, we call this hidden events. It's just events that are widespread, but people are not talking about for fear of loss of social status, ridicule, and so forth. So, in addition to getting facts, you know, we have Congress doing that again right now about UFOs. You relabel them as UAPs. You see what's going on there. You just relabel them as unidentified aerial phenomena, kind of remove some of the stigma, make it easier. You can relabel them. But, I mean, these are all games that people play to try to make the topic less controversial and perhaps less risky to talk about. And it's sort of the nature of hidden events. So there is the scientific aspect of these creatures, like with Bigfoot getting hair samples and plaster, hydrocal casts of footprints, maybe blood samples and all this. It's all fine. There's nothing wrong with getting that type of evidence. But there has to be someone that's willing to look at it. And if the professionals and experts in their fields feel like this is too risky to get involved with, it'll delay our knowledge of these subjects by quite a long time. In the history of science, it can delay this sort of knowledge by hundreds of years. I mean, even when, the telescope was discovered, when was that? In the 1700s, Leeuwenhoek. I mean, it took doctors another 150 years to start looking under microscopes at, for bacteria and so forth, because they didn't feel they needed to look through a microscope, because they were, had this divine status as being, from being doctors. They didn't need to be told anything else. They were quite content with their knowledge from Greek medicine about the fluids in the body and so forth, the 4 fluids and imbalance of fluids, and they used bloodletting as their main remedy for almost any ailment. So it takes a willingness to look at evidence. And there's this great book called Bad Medicine by David Wooten, who also wrote the discovery of science and the invention of science. And in Bad Medicine, he points out that, even with scientific discoveries, sort of the arrogance of the medical profession prevented progress from being made, because people feel like, again, we're at the top of our game. We don't need to be told what to do, so we don't want to look at any more evidence, which is sort of the older way of thinking of humans, is don't confuse me with the facts. My mind's already made up. I mean, this is sort of the attitude we got from the Greeks and from religious thinking, which is don't let your eyes fool you from what you know to be the truth. Facts don't matter. So modern people like us take a different point of view, because we have grown up with this idea that facts and evidence matter, and that facts and evidence can change our ideas about reality. That's a modern point of view. The idea used to be that facts don't matter because you already know what the truth is based on what Aristotle said, or the church, or something like that, whatever your church happened to be. So that is my point, is that you can see something that you've been taught isn't real, and you could forget about it and push it away and not even share it. So it isn't so much that our reality is made up of facts and perceptions. It's what facts and perceptions we're willing to allow in to our bubble of reality, our consensus reality that we've been taught is real, to the extent it won't upset the apple cart so much. And we're all used to agendas and bureaucracies and organizations not wanting to engage with newer facts. There's so many examples of this. So anyway, that is my story about Mary, and thanks for listening. I just think it's a fascinating aspect. And imagine you're writing a book on a subject, and someone you haven't seen in a while comes to visit, and you spend some time with them, and they end up having an experience which completely validates the book. In this case, it had this creeping feeling of doom just because she was in denial of it, and now she switched from being a skeptic to thinking that Bigfoot deserves some sort of federal protection, that they're another type of person or human out there, and they need some sort of protection. They need to be recognized, legally recognized, which I think is a good idea. I have a petition on change.org. You could look for it, change.org/protect Bigfoot. You're welcome to sign it to legally recognize that Sasquatch Bigfoot exist. So anyway, thanks for listening. We will see you in the next episode. Take care for now, and bye.